again, since you're under 2,500, that's more just an exercise in preparing this document. There are, I believe, 8 different things we had to consider in this plan, talking about the condition of the existing facility, the reasons why you'd be looking at another facility, other alternatives considered, such as going with the school or a standalone library facility. All of those things have been discussed in the past. But on page 3, there is a funding source here. The total application to USDA was just under $2.7 million. There was a state grant noted in that application of $308,000. I think that might have been a DNR grant. A deed grant, excuse me. As part of the other capital financial plan, which I'll get to in a little bit, the city had identified last fall $500,000 in cash it could throw towards the deal, and that would result in a borrowing of just under $1.9 million if you choose to go forward. Okay. Now there may be additional grants as well, which would lower that amount. And further, I understand there may be a capital campaign, a fundraising campaign. So to the extent that that's successful, you may not be able to reduce the borrowing, because in those situations pledges tend to come in over 3 to 5 years as opposed to all up front. But that revenue can be used to offset payments. And then finally, in the back is an exhibit. One of the other things we have to consider before we adopt a document like this is overlapping debt. And basically it takes a look at all of the debt of the city, and then all of the debt of the county and the school district. That's what they mean by overlapping debt. It's because as residents of Fillmore County, you have a part stake in that, you have a part stake in the school district, as well as all of the city debt. That's what they mean by overlapping. I will point out there is one error in that exhibit that Kathy caught with eyes like a hawk, and I'll just ask you to take one and pass it around. And that's simply, there was a loan for a fire truck that got paid off a year or so ago. So why don't I still want to get to the real capital financial plan. But if you could ask me or mention to me if I wasn't clear on something, or if I raised more questions than I answered, let's attack those now.
The source of the $500,000 cash?
That would be coming out of a capital outlay fund. As you'll see in this other document, the city, for many years, has been a winner in the LGA game. You've been getting more local government aid than comparable cities, and the city's been taking that extra LGA and dumping it into a capital outlay fund, which puts you in a good position to do lots of purchases and projects and so forth. That fund had, at one point, what was it, Kathy, over $800-some-thousand in it. And when we did the project last year, the utility improvement project, that fund should be reimbursed engineering that got paid previously to the tune of a couple $100,000 as well. And so in the capital financial plan, which we'll go over in a little bit, that's where the city identified that amount. I will mention that going into the future, one of the strategies in that next document was, because of LGA cuts, sure there were spending cuts to try and help offset some of that, but primarily the main strategy was to reduce that transfer into that. So we're putting less money into the capital outlay fund because of LGA cuts, and you may end up deciding to do that even further with what might happen this year and going into next, which we're not quite clear what will be. The reason I raised that issue is while that fund has been kind of a neat thing, and that extra LGA has been kind of a strength, and that strength is getting weakened and weakened and weakened. Yeah, okay. The only thing this document doesn't do for you is it doesn't calculate impacts. Doesn't talk about what would be a tax rate increase if you go through with this. The reasons, first of all, that's not required as part of the document, and the other reason is it was a bit of an unknown. We know what the total estimated cost is, We don't know if there's other grants to be had. We don't know if there's any fundraising that's gonna go on to reduce the impact. So basically, all we're doing is providing the legal authority to borrow. When we have those things, it'd be easy for me to tell you what the impact would be. But with those unknowns, it would be just pure guesswork at this point.
Any questions?
Assuming the maximum 2 point, was here for borrowing, what would be the payments? If you were to borrow that much?
Between 95 and 100,000
A year?
a year, based on that $1.888 million.
Okay.
And that's assuming a 1.88
Loan.
million loan.
Through the USDA over their 40 years that they're, I used 4.25% for planning purposes. So if there's other grants to be had, you know, that annual payment will go down, obviously.
Anything else?
At what point would it be good for you to just address the other document?
Well, if it's okay with the council, I would go segue right into that. It might answer some more questions.
Sounds good.
Okay. Do each of you have a copy of that handy in front of you? While you're looking at a paper document, the way this was actually prepared was done through a computer model we put on the screen, which allowed us to change all sorts of assumptions and immediately calculate tax impact, water rate impact, sewer rate impact, and so forth. We could change the date of a project, what the revenue streams were, whether we were using cash or borrowing money. But this is a summary of, we went through that process, which took a few months. This summarizes the findings of that. The first half of the report basically does a comparison of how the city of Rushford stacked up against other cities of similar size in southeastern Minnesota, and also similar sized cities across the entire state. And we looked at things such as tax base, which is on the first page there, where it looked like you had a below average tax base compared to other cities in the region. But as soon as we got rid of some of these TIF districts that are in town, we would be right in the ballgame. In state aids, on the second page at the top, you can see, at least in 2008, you collected $573,000 of LGA on the left there, and the cities in southeastern Minnesota of similar size were quite a bit less. Okay, that's where that source of money was coming. Every year you were building up that capital outlay fund. Tax rate down below, we had a slightly high city tax rate, but when we brought the county and the school into the mix, the total tax rate was actually lower than similar cities. Now that could change as you have referendums and so forth at the school, and if the county does certain things, but in 2008 that was the case. In the general fund, we like to see at the end of the year you have at least 50% cash in your fund versus how much you spend in the following year. And the reason being is your revenues are semi-annual, your taxes and your LGA. So basically you need to have enough cash to carry you from January 1 through June when you get your first half taxes. Then your fund goes down, it gets built back up, it goes back down in December when you get the second half taxes. And as you can see, you were above 50%, so your general fund was healthy. Utility rates, we based the comparison on 5,000 gallon users on a monthly basis. Some cities actually bill quarterly, some bill cubic gallons or cubic feet as opposed to gallons. But we change all that and compare apples